Bungalow Bill here. A new update has reached the beta branch, and it is a big one. It is beta 3.4.4. And what is probably the largest change is that dediblades have been removed, and they have been instead replaced with the Propeller blade. These Propeller blades require an unobstructed area for them to function, unlike dediblades, as well as they check clearance. So you can see that they have no clearance here. And they check clearance in both directions. So on one side is a 50% blockage, and on both sides is a 100% blockage. Reading through the patch notes for them, we see base output is 140 thrust per blade per area. Power use is 3.5 per blade per area. When it says per blade, I assume it means like this, not for each additional blade segment. So basically thrust and power use scale linearly with area. However, the cost efficiency gets better the larger the area of your blade is. If a block is in the way of a blade, the propeller stops working. So I can't put something inside this green circle. It's like a turret in that regard. Longer blades change speed slower. Hubs with more blade arms change speed slower. So you can see here at the bottom it says time to reach 100% thrust, 2.4 seconds. Removing blade arms or removing blade segments will change that. Max length for blades is 15. For reference, this is a 5-length blade that I'm using here. Output, not power use, for any given cell is reduced by 25% for each direction if it's up, down, side points inside the swept area of at least one other propeller. Spin blocks are also checked. That's a very not clear way of saying it. It suggests that propellers block each other by 25%. Not actually sure that's the case. Vents do, however, though. Let's check this. That is correct. It looks like roughly correct. Overlap efficiency loss, 40.6%. So you can stack them, but the results start to look bad. We'll get into the numbers later, maybe not all of them, but it's looking like CJEs may just be better than stacking propeller blades. Output, but not power use for any given cell, is reduced by 50% if it is blocked in one direction, by 100% if it is blocked in both directions. Vents and similar blocks count as 25% obstruction. And then this one's not really a patch note, but they just say, overall, propellers with good clearance are a very form sick of propulsion, and the parts are a small part of the cost, so can be made redundant. Not very well phrased, and isn't really patch notes. Propeller hub, 1000 health, 60 health, 100 weight, 100 materials, another typo. We'll go over what that actually means. Propeller blades, 600 health, 60 armor, which is what it was supposed to say, 50 weight, 50 materials. So these are reasonably heavy blocks on sort of the same scale as metal, but they have a huge amount of armor. Right? This is, you are not taking these out with flak. It's just not happening. Flak is, basically every time there's a change, it just seems to be another flak nerf. Flak doesn't kill anything anymore. It's just kind of ridiculous. Something else to look at, these blades use a raycast. There is no limit to the length of the raycast, right? So this is still a blockage. Propellers are affected by air density, similar to dediblades, but one order of magnitude stronger, more durable, can't be turned from, etc. Anyway, thrust output and power usage is based on the area covered by each individual blade line attached. So, and that's another rehashing of the previous statements. The patch notes are a bit longer than they needed to be. So anyway, let's do a comparison. So thrust 52,000, power use 1,300. The average clearance, unless you put a line of air ducts here, this is the least amount of blockage that you can really do. Thrust per power, 39. 40 is the technical maximum. Right, so that's almost double a jet engine. And if you look at a CJE that produces about the same amount of thrust, well, this is about 3.6 materials per second. At 1,300 power use, this will probably cost you about 2 materials per second. So these are a little bit under twice as power efficient as other propulsion. I haven't checked to see how their top speed behaves yet. So let's look at the cost. So I saved all of these prefabs. The custom jet engine is the most expensive at 3,100. The jets are a little bit less expensive at 2,500, but will require an engine to power them. And the propellers are the cheapest at 800 materials. They'll also need an engine to power them, but it is about half the size of the engine that the jets will need to propel them. That's all for propellers. So let's move on to some of the other changes. Campaign. At the maximum difficulty level, the player's faction strength is now overestimated by 3 times plus 5 million, rather than 10 times plus 10 million. Now, the next point is there's a new slider for diplomacy/strategic AI aggressiveness. This should be included in design difficulty. This used to be included in design difficulty slider. You can now have a diplomatic campaign against the hardest vehicles or an all-out war, but with easy vehicles. And this new slider is continuous from 0 to 3, I believe. To me, this suggests that the previous point about the faction strength adjustment is probably being applied to other difficulties as well, because otherwise it would cause the slider mentioned second to have discontinuous results. Right, so maybe it'll only affect like expert mode and harder. I've asked on the Discord but haven't gotten a response about that yet. And there has been a change to some amount of melee as well. Here I'll start with the changes to rams. So you've probably seen this vehicle a bit in my campaign playthrough if you've been watching my channel, and you've seen the sort of damage that it can do to enemy vehicles. If you have not, you can check out my short video of it ramming the Mobula. It could just absolutely destroy enemy vehicles. However, now if I hover over the ram, I get a new tooltip. Damage done, stationary target. So the speed will be slightly different. It'll depend on the actual difference between this and the enemy vehicle. And this sub-object is not rotating because there's no enemy. This tooltip will change when I spawn an enemy and it starts rotating. So we will check that in a second. However, the patch notes for this is damage done by each individual ram impact is a function of impact speed and spinner mass. Max kinetic energy stored in a spin block is a function of its mass and rotation speed. Ram and spin block tooltips added. Rams on other constructs and pistons use the energy of the main construct to do damage. Rams on spin blocks use up a kinetic energy generated by the spin block for each hit. Spin block kinetic energy regenerates based on motor drive. 1 times rate is free. Motor drive can increase it to 11 times the base rate. And one more related patch note is in the bug fix section. Collisions. Fixed too many collisions triggering at once. Damage output is more predictable now. More predictable means lower. Alright, for an apples to apples comparison, I'm going to spawn in the Mobula because I have rammed the Mobula with this before, so it's a decent reference. I have God mode on just so that this will not get destroyed by an impact or that sort of thing. I've not checked to see how reliable the collisions actually are. There is a note that the steam drill collisions are now more reliable. There's no such patch note for these rams. Okay, she started spinning. So let's check the tooltips again. So now you can see that she is storing impact damage in the sub-object that is spinning. And so we have construct impact damage per second, as well as the stored impact damage here. And there's no motor drive on the spin block because it used to not do anything. The impact, not a lot of damage. That's really not very much damage. And if I check these again, there's now no more stored impact damage. And you can see our damage is going up very, very slow right now. However, look, we're just tickling her. This is absolutely pathetic. Now, I'm going to destroy the mobula, and I'm going to set motor drive on the spin block because I have extra engine power, and let's see what that does. All right. Let's try this again. Okay, that used up all of my engine power. Power use, 49,000. Wow. That is, to me, this does not seem like a good use of power. We'll see if I can even track targets successfully anymore. Oh, it looks like we can't. Well, this isn't going to be terribly relevant anyway, because if the maximum power use is 49,000, what I can do is a drop in the bucket. There is a small amount more in the patch notes about this. It says that low motor drive rams are more efficient, but the TLDR is just that steam drills are, I think, supposed to be how you ram things now. Perhaps with an incredibly massive vehicle, you might be able to get something out of the ram, but they seem primarily to be decorative and maybe to reduce impact damage that you take from hitting an enemy vehicle because these don't receive impact damage. So there's another section. I'm just going to read it because it's about something that I haven't used before, and we will get to why I haven't used it. But then the next one I'll actually have a demo for. Oh, actually I lied. Let me do one that I do have a demo for. So we're going to load my most recent water skimmer, which I made for the campaign where I'm building things live and only making them out of wood. So we have the AWS that never goes down. Price is about 38,000 before this patch. Now it's about 3,000 more. The reason is hydrofoils. Base force up by 50%. Health up from 85 to 150. Armor from 1 to 5. Cost from 3 to 10. Why these are so much more delicate than propellers, I have absolutely no idea. Now have the same drag custom rudders have. That does not mean anything to me. So I believe custom rudders have a drag when they apply a force. I do not know if that's what that means. Turn rate increased from 40 degrees per second to 180 degrees per second. So hydrofoils, I'll unpause this for a second. There we go. Hydrofoils can go from plus 45 degrees to minus 45 degrees. It used to take them about 2 seconds to fluctuate, and that could make it very hard to stabilize hydrofoil vehicles that had their hydrofoils always in the water without using other forms of stabilization as well. That will be much easier now. They'll also be a little bit tougher. Flak just really doesn't kill anything anymore. It'll still kill these eventually, but it'll be much, much slower than it was before. I think Flak is going to need a rework at this point because it's just pathetic right now. We'll get into even more indirect flak nerfs soon. But let's see how this actually changed this vehicle. This thing had a top speed of about 90 to 100 kilometers or meters per second earlier. Not kilometers per second, that would be rather fast.
Receiving. Moving now.
So, for something like this, does not keep the hydrofoils in the water. Very little has changed. It just sort of bounces off the surface. Let's spot in a water skimmer that does not just bounce off the surface. And still, very little has changed. This is about how she was before. She should probably be a little bit steadier now because these blocks can adjust faster. Current force and drag. Yes, okay, so these will now be applying. So that is what that meant, is that as these apply force, they will also apply drag. Actually, I think this used to be faster than this. Well, it's just going to read the top speed anyway. But not a huge difference. Honestly, probably a small hydrofoil nerf, all things considered. Which is a shame because hydrofoils weren't very good. However, not a big deal. Just use not quite as many hydrofoils, I guess. Still worse off overall than before, I think. Alright, now I'll get on to one that I'm just going to talk about. Simple rudders. Base force down to 20% the previous value. So, simple rudders had their force scaled based on the construct's mass. So, they would basically give you a constant ability to turn regardless of how big you were. They still do that, but they do it 1/5 as well as they used to because they're overpowered, I guess. This will give some absolutely monstrous turning circles to some ships. I haven't tested this because I don't use simple rudders. This may make a lot of vehicles unworkable and require different steering solutions. Health up from 85 to 600. Armor from 1 to 10. Weight from 15 to 50. Cost from 10 to 50. Multiple simple rudders combined provide the same force as one. You used to be able to stack them and you could turn on the spot. They now have the same drag custom rudders have. Okay, so we did discover what that meant with the hydrofoils. They now only work if their up, down, and forward-back axes match the main construct. You used to be able to put on roll and pitch rudders. They could give you large amounts of control over the craft, but the code was not intended to handle them, and they were severely buggy. The solution was just to remove them. So some related things are control surfaces. Air control surfaces now have the same drag custom rudders have. So let's go into build mode. So that should be referring to these, but all of these. Okay, so that nerf is being applied to everything. I'll have to see how it affects a lot of my vehicles. We'll see. I also heard that wings now require motion of the main construct. Let's give that a quick test, because I haven't tested that myself yet. Let's give myself a small platform. That's not the direction I meant to build this, but it really doesn't matter too much. So this is not in the patch notes as far as I could find it. Maybe it is and I just looked over it, but rotate to angle, continuous. Yes, we are not going anywhere. However, you could probably still get this sort of thing to work by just moving, like using some engines to get your construct up to speed. Let's test that. This may mean that one of my vehicles no longer works, or works less effectively than it used to. Right, so these wings are not going to work at all in the water. However, she does have jets, so let's let her get out.
Listening. Moving out.
And let's check the top speed. It used to be 88 meters per second. Yeah, that's not happening anymore, is it? That might have been a severe overestimation, but I don't think that making ornithopters is really much of a thing anymore. I imagine these wings are still doing something. Okay, yeah, so these wings are still doing something. You can still see the force vectors from them. However, I believe they used to output more force than the CJEs, or at least comparable. It looks like the CJEs are putting out more force now. Although supposedly these, I think lift lines were supposed to have been rescaled. However, it might just be for some objects. Let me check the patch notes again. So UI, custom rudder / control surfaces tooltips show how many custom blocks are in the given sheet and the sum of their current output. Force visualization helper, which is what I just had open, in build mode now shows the square root of force, and the line thickness for buoyancy is lower. Easier to see what is going on with the vehicle. So they're not linear comparisons anymore. Now, let's read through the patch notes for control surfaces. Custom control surfaces, 2 to 4 meter pivots added for custom control surfaces, 1 to 4 meter pivots, and a 2 meter shaft pivot added for custom rudders, so you don't have to put them on spin blocks. 2 to 4 meter rectangular plates added for custom rudders. I guess just so that you can make bigger custom rudders with fewer blocks and probably have them resist HE a little bit better. Custom control pivot health up from 100 to 200. Armor from 1 to 20. Weight from 2.5 to 20. Cost from 5 to 30. Custom control surface base health up from 100 to 200. Armor from 1 to 15. Weight from 2.5 to 15. Cost from 5 to 20. Custom control surfaces give 50% more thrust in air than custom rudders. Custom control surfaces now add drag based on their force output. So we've been seeing this in all of the new control blocks. This is just a thing now. Custom control surfaces turn 3 times as fast as a custom rudder of the same size. So they'll be more responsive. I think it's supposed to be like they're lighter and twitchier. And air vehicles need more responsive control surfaces than water vehicles for the most part anyway. Custom control surfaces turns 3 times as fast as a custom rudder of the same size. Custom rudder base health up from 35 to 400. Armor from 15 to 50. Weight from 4 to 80. Cost from 1 to 30. Custom rudder blocks using multiple cells also provide more force. Custom rudder pivot base health is 500. Armor 50. Weight 100. Cost 50. Custom rudders give 100% more thrust in water than custom control surfaces. Force output up by approximately 1 order of magnitude for both custom control surfaces and custom rudders. And this is the reason that I haven't really used them before, is that I think they just didn't do enough. But now simple rudders are down, and custom rudders and control surfaces are up. New common code for custom control surfaces and custom rudders. Both can be used as simple plates on spin blocks or with their own pivot blocks. Right, so I don't have a perspective for how these change things because I don't have any vehicles that use them. However, going forwards, I will try them out. A really quick boat to demonstrate some of the new stuff from the patch, primarily the steam drill because I haven't really tested this out, and they've put in new steam drill components. So I'll get this working, figure out how the rudder pivots are actually supposed to work, and then we'll get into the demo, and after that I'll finish reading through the rest of the patch notes and bug reports. Alrighty, here we are. Here's a really simple boat. It demonstrates a few of the new things. So, it's using large rudders, which are actually functional now. That's a lot of force and drag, but I'm assuming that's fine. Things aren't exactly lined up where they could be in terms of center of mass and such, but I threw this together really quickly. So, these use the 4x1 pivot the long way, and then 4x1 sections behind it. And then, if you place a bunch of these large wheels and press Q on them, you can connect them to other crank wheels that are in the same plane that have the same maximum RPM. And they will all be synchronized to the same speed. If you have multiple drive units that connect to them, like these propellers, the request for a transmission, like I have here, since I only have one transmission, it will use the highest requested output of any of the propellers. So I can't set some of these faster and some of these slower and use it to yaw. However, if I linked up wheels here and then had multiple transmissions, I could do that setup. But the huge transmission, or the large transmission rather, is so big, it's so heavy and so expensive. But basically I just put one really quick and dirty steam engine in here. It's just 2-stage 1-to-1. And then at the bow, we have the new large steam drills. There are old ones as well, but these are way, way bigger. And I believe everything's been rescaled. So this one has 2,000 damage per hit, 40 armor piercing. So for each hit, it'll drain 1,000 kinetic energy. Well, the shaft has 40,000 damage, or 400,000 damage worth of kinetic energy. So we'll see how this works. And if we go to the steam engine, they're currently generating, well, we'll check if they get loaded up more later. But the capability to do what about 6,000 kinetic damage per second, which isn't great, but with all of the kinetic energy stored, it's pretty fantastic. And this only costs 44,000 materials, most of which is armor. On the receiving end, we have a RIA, which is completely turned off. And my ship is in God mode just to stop any accidents from happening. Yes, you can tell that I built this quickly. So, yes, actually working as intended. I sort of forgot about this because in my own ramming vehicles, I don't use the AI because it is not the best. Alright, let's see what happens. Okay, this is good damage. I don't have a... Right, so... One thing is, I don't have a drill lower down. I should probably rerun this test, either with another drill, or I can put another extension on. There's a bigger one. So this shaft is almost full kinetic energy still. Alrighty, it's time to test that again. Something that I did notice is that the large steam drill head gives you good drag reduction. The wide drill bit doesn't. So that does sort of reinforce perhaps making the entire front of your vehicle just out of the large steam drill head. However, it's left and right clearance. That's interesting. But not up and down. So you can't make the entire thing out of it. But you can do lines with one gap between them. Let's see how we steer in this time. It'll be interesting. This time I have collision avoidance off. The previous time that we hit on the broadside might not have been because of the charging AI trying to land on the broadside. It might have been because we were trying to avoid collisions. Although that doesn't really explain it that well. We'll find out in a second. The turning radius of my vehicle may be important as well. I don't know how big it is, but it's quite high. Alright, hopefully we're going to yaw in soon. That's a lot of shaft kinetic energy. That's 2 million kinetic damage stored up. Alright, not the best collision angle because we're going to start to rub sides with her. But for an unoptimized vehicle like this, I think that's pretty respectable. Okay, so the kinetic damage per hit starts to fall as the shaft's kinetic energy falls, so you do want a big engine that can really stack up. Yeah, so you might want to optimize those for each other. Anyway, this looks pretty fantastic. This is the sort of old kinetic damage that I'm used to. So, obviously not an optimized vehicle for ramming, and that's about all that we're going to get to do on this particular ramming pass. So 9%, but if we landed a square hit and didn't get stuck like that, I mean, we obviously could have cut the rate in half. We only did about half of the kinetic damage that we have stored up, and we've already regened a lot of that. Anyway, that's sort of the collision update and the steam engine update. I'm going to go take a look at the rest of the patch notes because I didn't read through them in order for this. Oh, there is something else that I want to look at that I remember off the top of my head. And then I'll read the bug fixes that I didn't mention, as well as probably a few other things that I forgot. Something that was put on here is it said that constructs will now propagate both thump and EMP damage to other constructs. Alrighty. To make this a little bit more fair, I'm just going to get everything off of this construct, off of the sub-object. Crank my EMP damage really high. Okay, so In the patch notes, presumably this whole impact and EMP damage going to other constructs has to do with the split, like the separator blocks. Anyway, let me go and check out the rest of the patch notes. So I did miss APS. Heat secondary body for APS is now only 70% of a head. Final power is unchanged. So that makes it shorter as far as the actual shell length that it consumes. Hesh base power up by 11%. Heat base power up by 5%. Squash and shaped charge base power increased by 15% for APS only. Missile heat is the same. So just APS heat and hash around the board buff. And since we have been going through melee changes here, melee pack damage multiplier decreased from 20 times to 10 times. I was never super impressed by melee packs due to how overpowered other melee options were. But because of how overpowered they were, or spin block rams were, I didn't give melee packs the shakedown that I could have, so I have no idea if this 100% nerf or 50% nerf was actually justified. In addition to this, there is not much that I think is really worth going through in the fixes unless you're very dedicated to some of those. The wing one I sort of went over. Effective speed for wings is capped at the speed of the main construct, which is why my ornithopter doesn't really work anymore, because the speed that the wings were moving at was much faster than the speed that the main construct is capable of getting to. It still functions once the jets have gotten it up to speed, but it has nowhere near the power that it used to. It'll also be nearly helpless once it enters the water now, whereas previously the wings could power it underwater by themselves. So I think that I'm going to rebuild my Thopter, the Darning Needle, and I'm probably going to make a new plane to replace the Thundershock at some point. So just a few small interceptors and that sort of thing, and maybe get to use the new air control blocks, try to make a decent fighter. I'll see how it goes. I'm not super interested in making air superiority dogfighters and getting really into the Lua stuff that some other people have done, but I'll try to make something that's reasonably evasive, hard to take down, and serves the fly swatting role and can replace those two vehicles. The Thundershock because it's not terribly meta, the Darting Needle because it's been nerfed a bit. Also changed render queues for smoke and shields to render properly in front of and behind glass, so you don't have issues with glass rendering where it shouldn't. Anyway, that was a whole lot, and I believe that does conclude these patch notes. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I hope to see you in the future.